Turn to the next book, 2 Peter.
Thank you for explaining Psalm 19.
Yeah, that's a good.
The whole time to give you that.
It's a good chapter. 2 Peter chapter 2. This we'll have to finish another time, and it's an exciting chapter, but we'll start it. 2 Peter 2, verse 1. Now we'll just do this thing verse by verse and enjoy it. 2 Peter 2, verse 1. But there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you. Okay, so he's made an analogy here. There were false prophets, but there ain't no more. Prophecy's over. Now what shows up is teaching. Okay. So what's a prophet do? A prophet reveals new information from God that you don't have in writing. That's why he's got to prophesy it, because you don't have a book you can look at. Well, we've already got everything he wants to say. What's a teacher do? A teacher explains existing information. There's already a textbook. Let me teach it to you. Okay, that's a teacher. In 1 Corinthians 11:19, he says, "For there must also be heresies among you, that they which are approved may be made manifest among you." Okay, so there's going to be false teachers, and they're going to teach some things that are wrong. Paul's saying, look, some heresy is just natural. It's not somebody intending to deceive you. It's just they didn't get a full understanding of something. And that's okay. We should see some of that, or else nobody's thinking. Everybody's just a little parrot. Okay, so we should see some people thinking on their own, and the thought have not fully developed. They've not seen all the scripture on a subject. They've not figured it all out yet, and they've got part of the piece, and they think they got the whole answer. Okay, he's saying that's okay, because when that happens, somebody who's approved, who has the answer and can put all the pieces together, will be made manifest. It'll be apparent. Revelation 2, verse 20. He says, "Notwithstanding, I have a few things against thee, because thou sufferest that woman Jezebel, which calleth herself a prophetess." She doesn't call herself a teacher. She calls herself a prophet. Why? She wants to disguise she's a false teacher. But the wool's been pulled off. "To teach and seduce my servants to commit fornication and to eat things sacrificed unto idols." Okay, so there he's saying in the end times, in the tribulation, false teachers are going to be a problem. Now, he's going to connect this false teaching as devious and done with malice of forethought. It's not just somebody who made a mistake and taught the wrong thing. We've all done that. If you haven't, you will. But it's somebody who knowingly teaches the wrong thing. And then it's a big litany that he's going to give us here on it. All right, back to 2 Peter 2:1. "Who privately shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bringing upon themselves swift destruction." Okay, so he's set it up here. False teacher is going to give Scripture a different meaning than God had intended. And that's the thesis statement for the chapter. Then he's going to develop that thought all the way through this whole chapter, and he's going to tell you how they deceive, the type of people they deceive, what happens to them, what happens to the people they deceive, and it's a good chapter. So look down at verse 3, 2 Peter 2:3. "And through covetousness shall they with feigned words make merchandise of you, whose judgment now of a long time lingereth not, and their damnation slumbereth not." Okay, so this false teacher is more than just a mistaken interpretation. They intended what they said. They intend to make merchandise. Did you see that? They want to make merchandise of the congregation. Okay, what's merchandise? Merchandise is a product that's for sale. Okay, who are they going to sell it to? Not God. They're going to sell it to the world. How are they going to sell it to the world? The world doesn't want to be a Christian. They're going to make the Christian look like something appealing to the world. So let's turn our church into a nightclub. Now it's appealing to the world. Our crowd is used to a nightclub. They're sold on nightclubs. They'll walk into the nightclub, and the nightclub's got alcohol and the church doesn't, and the nightclub will seem more fun. Merchandise. They've sold you out. Their subtle ploy is exposed by Peter. They use covetousness. So what's the gospel they preach? Prosperity. I'll help you covet. I'll help you get anything you want. Anything you want, you can have. Or if you're not there, I'll give you some things you need to want. So they preach from the pulpit, God's man ought to have a jet. Okay. So now they've developed covetousness in the pulpit, or in the pew. So the pulpit says, I've got a jet. Well, Joe Blow doesn't need a jet, but he sure could use a Mercedes. So it's developing that. Okay? Through covetousness, now you can be turned into merchandise that we can sell to the world. That's these people he's talking about. Now back up to verse 2. And many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. Pernicious, that's an adjective. It means having a harmful effect, especially in a gradual or subtle manner. That comes from the Oxford Dictionary. It's a subtle attempt to lure you in. So they don't just come out one Sunday and say, we're going to be a contemporary church service and we're going to have rock music on the stage. And no, they don't do all that. It's subtle. We're going to have praise hymns. We're still going to do what we always do, but there's some great, little 3-line ditties that we're going to hum over and over and over and over and over. All right. And then pretty soon, there's a whole bunch of music just like this that y'all loved so much and you learned so quick because there was only 3 words to it. We're going to get rid of your hymn book. And you see it's a gradual, subtle, until they can work you into something they can sell as merchandise to the world. It's subtle. 2 Peter 2:2. By reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. Pernicious ways, plural, is the opposite of the way of truth. In James chapter 1, verse 11, he says, For the sun is no sooner risen with the burning heat, but it withereth the grass, the flower thereof falleth, the grass. I've got this all messed up. James 1:11. I don't know how that got messed up on my screen. James 1:11. I got to read this. James 1, verse 11. For the sun is no sooner risen with a burning heat, but it withereth the grass, and the flower thereof falleth, and the grace of the fashion of it perisheth. So also shall the rich man fade away in his, what's the last word? Ways, plural. So that's what they do. It's ways. They appeal to the masses. If we don't have a class that you're interested in, just tell us and we'll create one. No, it's the way of truth, singular. This is what we have. Like it or lump it or leave it. The pyramid scheme doesn't collapse on the first or second tier. These pyramid schemes. They want to be a salesperson. Yeah, Amway, all that stuff. Well, the first 2 or 3 tiers of the thing, maybe 4 or 5, maybe even down to 50, does real well. And eventually they get to where they run out of taking money from somebody to pay somebody else. There's nobody left to take money from, and the whole thing collapses. That's the same way this thing's going to happen. They're going to make merchandise out of you. Okay, well, soon they're out of a job because they've turned everybody into world. So now they've suddenly got to come in and be world, or they've got to be out of a job. They got to go join the world. That's where it's heading. Next, Peter gives 3 examples of this. In verse 4, he talks about angels that sinned, and they're locked up in chains of darkness in hell. In verse 5, he talks about Noah and the world that was destroyed, except for one family who's saved. In verse 6 to 8, he talks about Lot, Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed, Lot and his 2 daughters being saved. Peter spends 3 verses on the example given under Lot. The most time of the 3 examples he gives is Lot, and we'll look at it. 2 Peter 2, verse 8. For that righteous man dwelling among them in seeing and hearing vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds. So what we find here is he's going to set up some analogies. As you read through this, I'm not going to read all of it to you, but as you read this, you'll start seeing he's separating this is good, this is bad. He starts conditioning your mind. Righteous versus ungodly. Holy versus wicked. Here's the way he does it. In verse 6, the bad thing is ungodly. In verse 7, the bad thing is filthy conversation, opposed to the good thing, just Lot. In verse 8, it's unlawful deeds versus righteousness, used twice. So he's setting these opposing things up all the way through. 2 Peter 2, verse 9. The Lord knoweth how to deliver the godly out of temptations, and to reserve the unjust unto the day of judgment to be punished. Okay, isn't that great? God knows how to deliver. So if you got mixed up in that mess, God can deliver you. Even if you were duped by the false teacher, God can deliver you. Even if you are the false teacher, God could deliver you. God's efforts to deliver man is not enough. Now that seems non-biblical.
It's based on free will.
That's right. God's effort to deliver man's not enough if man has no desire to be delivered. Ask Lot's wife. She was in the middle of being delivered, and her desires were so strong after having been told the city's burning, and I'm sure she could feel the heat of it. Don't look back. Her desires for the wickedness were so strong she turned and looked back. Okay, if a man doesn't want deliverance, God won't force him to be delivered. And then the destruction will come. Look at verse 9. The Lord knoweth how to deliver. That's one thing he can do. And to punish. Now the first word of verse 10. No, 2 words of verse 10. But chiefly. What does that mean? It means especially. The top of the list. So, deliverance or punishment is the most near for the people on this list that follow. Either deliverance or punishment. Here's the list that follows. Verse 10. Chiefly them that walk after the flesh in the lust of uncleanness, and despise governments. Presumptuous are they, self-willed. They're not afraid to speak evil of dignities. Okay, so he's broke it down. He gives us 2 categories and 2 subpoints for each category. The first category is that walk after the flesh. This defines walking after the flesh, the lust of uncleanness. If you desire something God does not consider clean, you're walking after the flesh. Despise government. Wow. That's an eye-opener. Don't fall into the trap of let's talk about how horrible our government is. Do you know at this time they're living under a literally horrible government? Mm-hmm. We haven't seen horrible. Mm-hmm. He says don't despise government. Living right in the middle of a mess. Presumptuous. That's the next category. The two subpoints are self-willed and speak evil of dignities. In James 3:2 he says this, "For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man and able to bridle the whole body." Self-control starts with a man's mouth. That list right there can't even get started if we keep control of our mouth. And that's a hard thing to do. Remember the thing that got Adam and Eve in trouble? I'm going to set him aside for a minute. He had other problems. Eve, let's go to Eve. Eve's mouth got her in trouble, first with words, then with action of the mouth. Okay, so our problem's going to be the same. This mouth is going to start running. And at first, it may not be that it's within earsight of anybody else. But soon that practice is going to change, and it'll be around someone else. You can tell a person is beginning to backslide when their language changes. If they can't talk like a Christian and control their language, they're on this list. And they're right near, they're in the chiefly category. They're close to being delivered, or they're close to being destroyed. It's up to them. The farther you get away from God, the closer you are to Him. Now that seems crazy, but you know what? Until we come to the end of ourselves, until we look up in the pig pen and say, "I'm in the pig pen," we don't get saved. Salvation is to those who are not righteous, but the sinner. The righteous man, or the self-righteous man, he's not getting saved.
That's right.
He doesn't think he needs it. The closest man to it is the wickedest man there is, if he'll look up. But he's also closest to destruction, if he won't look the right way. 2 Peter 2:12. But these, what time have we got? We better stop. I've gone an hour. We'll pick up there. We'll pick up in verse 11. 2 Peter 2, verse 11. This is a great chapter. I knew I wouldn't finish it. In fact, I didn't even finish writing the notes for it. We only went down to verse 16, I think, or something. All right, we'll pick it up there next week.